All right, so we're diving deep today, folks. And we're tackling the forces at play, really those shaping the art world and the wider humanities landscape. It's a lot, but we've got some pretty amazing sources lined up, I think, to guide us through this.
Definitely. Yeah, for starters, we've got a lecture from Sarah Thornton, who, I gotta say, has this super unique view on the art world. She
Yeah.
sees it less as this unified thing, and more like uh, international groups of subcultures who don't always agree, like,
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah. And they can be pretty vocal about those disagreements, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And to illustrate that point, we've got some perspectives to compare and contrast. Like Amy Capilazzo, who is at Christie's. I mean, she sees art straight through that auction house lens. It's a luxury good. It's an investment, like buying real estate almost.
She actually uses that analogy, right? With
Yeah.
Warhol's is like studio apartments versus penthouses.
Exactly. Very market driven.
Very much so. And then you've got, as a counterpoint, we have a teacher from CalArts bringing in that art school perspective. Art is serious play, taking those internal thoughts and, like, making them real.
It's interesting, right, to think about how these two very different worlds would actually value the same piece of art.
Oh, totally different valuations. I mean, one's focused on the creative expression, the other's looking at, like, the monetary value, its potential to appreciate.
And to Thornton's point, this all ties back to belief systems. Like, not everyone necessarily gets contemporary art. Some people, prefer Impressionism or Renaissance art.
Right, and for them, the artist's hand, that direct physical creation is really important.
Yeah. And this is where the whole ready-made thing comes in, like Duchamp's fountain, the urinal on a pedestal. For some, that's like a radical moment. For others, it's just absurd.
Right, it really challenges what we consider art, doesn't it?
Totally. And then you've got Sherry Levine's bronze cast of Duchamp's urinal and Catalan's LOVE sculpture smack dab in Milan's financial district. It's almost like a commentary on the status of art itself, like this weird class dynamic within the art world.
Oh, for sure. Like the wealthy collectors and artists versus those who maybe aren't as commercially successful.
Exactly. And Thornton then talks about how historically contemporary art was very geographically focused. Like it was centered in Europe and North America, places like New York, LA, those major cities.
Yeah. And places like China were basically excluded because of their political system at the time. And Africa, well, they had other priorities.
Right. So the whole idea of art as this like luxury good wasn't really a thing in many parts of the world. And then you see how globalization changes everything.
Right. And a perfect example of this is, how the Warhol market evolved. His Mao series back in '72 wasn't popular at all.
In that Zurich show.
Yeah. Swiss businessmen weren't exactly lining up to put an oversized communist on their walls.
Can't blame them, really. But then, fast forward to 2005, one of those Mao paintings sells for a record price.
$17.45 million. That's a big jump.
Huge. It really shows how those Chinese buyers entered the scene, influencing the market.
And it wasn't just with Warhol. I mean, you see it with Rothko, too, right?
Oh, yeah. Russians showing interest in him, maybe because of his background. And the Arab world, they love abstraction, which again boosted Rothko's prices. And then you have the Rockefeller-Rothko sale.
Over $70 million. Highest price for a post-war work at that time.
So what do you make of that shift?
To me, it's a clear sign of how the players in the art market have changed, right?
Yeah.
There's more global wealth, new regions taking interest in contemporary art.
It's not just about aesthetics anymore. It's also about, like, investment. Art as an asset class, almost.
Definitely. Especially after the 2008 crisis, when people lost faith in traditional investments.
And then you have that Yves Saint Laurent collection sale in Paris in February 2009, setting record prices even in the middle of the recession.
Right. It's like the art market wasn't even phased. I mean, they were selling Duchamp's found perfume bottle, Eileen Gray chairs.
It was all going for top dollar. And it's interesting, Thornton brings up that Duchamp perfume bottle as an example of, like, the artist almost becoming a brand.
Oh, yeah. Almost like those figures they use to sell consumer goods. It's like Duchamp's playing with our idea of what art is, what we value.
And she makes a connection to a younger artist who used a scanned $20 bill in their work, which is like taking it even further.
It is. It really blurs the lines between art and commerce.
And it's not just about the market. We're seeing more people go to museums for modern and contemporary art.
Globally, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because art offers something real in this increasingly digital world.
Tangible, you can experience it with your senses. It's not just pixels on a screen.
And Thornton contrasts Hirst's mass production of objects with Fraser's performance art, which is all about critiquing the market.
And we're seeing more interest in events, performance art, things that happen live that you can't just download.
Makes sense. There's a certain energy, a uniqueness to those experiences.
So Thornton then talks about how art can transcend language. She uses Geshmu Ogitende as an example. He's a Kenyan artist based in Brooklyn, and his first language is Kikuyu.
And in Kikuyu, there's not even a word for artist. The closest terms are more like magician or someone who gives meaning to objects.
Which is fascinating, right? Like how different cultures view the role of the artist.
Definitely. And Ogitende himself describes artists as speaking for their group, revealing secrets. And then you have Elanatsui, whose work you can appreciate without knowing the backstory.
But then you learn about the materials, right?
Yeah, those everyday materials transformed into something beautiful. And it connects to the whole arte povera tradition.
Transforming the mundane into art.
Exactly. And despite all this globalization, Thornton emphasizes that location still matters for artists.
Where they come from, where they feel they can speak from. She uses Elm Green and Dragset as an example.
And their gay marriage piece, right?
But yeah, and how being in New York, having that residency, was validating for them. And then there's that comment from Elm Green about identity groups being so last century.
Which is provocative, especially in today's climate.
It is. And Thornton also points out how New York's influence is waning a bit, with artists moving to LA or other places.
But then she talks about the challenges of starting a career in a place like, I don't know, Minnesota or somewhere more isolated.
Right. You still need those face-to-face interactions.
Especially in the art world, it seems.
So she brings up Tariq Al-Hussein, a Palestinian artist who's based in the UAE.
Sharjah, specifically.
Right. And it's interesting because the UAE, for all its complexities, is actually pretty open to artists from certain regions.
It's a reminder of how immigration plays a huge role in shaping artistic identities.
Definitely. And she contrasts Ruth Asawa, who was initially seen as just a local artist, with her later international recognition.
It's like that local artist label can almost feel limiting, even a bit dismissive.
And then you have Francis Alice, a Belgian artist who works in Mexico City.
And his early work documented the city itself, which is interesting.
For him, it seems like emigrating actually allowed him to, escape the weight of his own cultural background.
But then he found that Mexico City became essential to his artistic identity.
It's complex, right? That relationship between place and identity.
Absolutely.
So Thornton brings up this idea of credibility and belief in the art world, and she observes how quickly people form opinions about artists, especially at big events.
The biennials, the art fairs, those are like judgment zones.
They are, and this leads to Ari Weiwei's perspective on what makes an artist. He tells that story about his father, who was a painter, but then...
He became a poet because political imprisonment.
Right, and then he was exiled. So Weiwei comes to this conclusion: the artist is an enemy of general sensibilities.
But Thornton points out that the weight of that statement depends on where it's coming from. Like it means something different coming from an artist in a country without free speech.
It's that geography of credibility thing again. And then she talks about the tension between being credible and being a celebrity.
Or just staying unknown. The whole authenticity thing is still an issue, even after Warhol.
Right. And she contrasts Warhol's embrace of artifice with the emotional focus of the abstract expressionists.
And then she brings in Hockney's critique of Hirst's reliance on assistants. The whole debate about craftsmanship,
Yeah. Different degrees of authenticity, integrity. It's fascinating. Now, Julian Cox joins Thornton for this discussion, and we get to learn about her background. It's art history, but also sociology and ethnography.
Which is a really interesting combination.
Very much so. And she explains that she focuses on the context surrounding the artwork.
The cultural, economic, social, technological factors. It's not just about the object itself.
Right. And it's funny because she says people sometimes see her work as juicy or gossipy.
Because she avoids all that jargon. She wants to reach a wider audience.
Yeah.
But those in the know, those in ethnography or sociology, they get it.
They see the patterns, the structures.
Exactly. And her PhD was on dance clubs and raves, which seems unrelated, but...
But it actually informs her approach.
Right. She applies those theories of Bourdieu about taste and hierarchies and value judgments.
And it's all about understanding those unseen forces shaping the art world.
Absolutely.
And her process for choosing artists for her books is interesting, too. Like, with 33 artists in 3 acts, she's not just picking artists she believes in, but also those who can articulate their ideas well.
That makes sense. You need people who can talk, who can bring those concepts to life. And she even mentions that Cindy Sherman, who's notoriously private, initially declined to be interviewed.
But then she agreed for an Economist piece.
It shows how challenging it can be to get access to these artists.
It does. And then she talks about interviewing like really polarizing figures like Jeff Koons.
Oh, yeah. Koons is a whole other level. She talks about how hard it was to get past his, performance.
Right. And how he uses abstraction and, more provocative themes to avoid answering directly.
Interesting strategy.
It is. But she's interested in how artists see themselves, what gives them confidence. And we get these great anecdotes like Koons listing his museum shows.
Name dropping at his finest.
And Baldessari's comment about artists needing to, wear their CVs as badges.
It's funny, but also kind of sad. It shows how much external validation matters in the art world.
It does. And Thornton also talks about the importance of marketing, even though artists hate that term.
But those who make it big, they often have a knack for self-promotion.
And building relationships with those influential dealers.
Right. You got to play the game.
You do. But then she points out that some artists operate entirely outside the market. They rely on residencies, grants, museum support.
Like Andrea Frazier, whose whole thing is critiquing the market. It's a reminder that the art world is really diverse.
Multi-layered. And finally, she talks about how artists who've achieved credibility often resist being categorized.
They don't fit into neat little boxes.
Right. And she reiterates how New York's dominance is fading, with these international events blurring the lines between different art scenes.
Beijing, Berlin, Brooklyn, they're all connected now.
They are. So our next source, Contemporary Issues in Arts and Humanities, it gives us this broader look at the trends shaping these fields, like digitalization, the globalization of culture, the emphasis on diversity and inclusion.
Big, sweeping changes.
And it's important to think about how these trends affect artistic creation, how we consume and interpret art, and the larger societal implications.
It's not just happening in a vacuum. It's all connected.
And the text points out that there are debates surrounding these trends. With globalization, there's the whole homogenization versus hybridity thing.
And how do we preserve cultural heritage in this increasingly globalized world?
Right. And with digitalization, you have the copyright issues, questions about access, and how art production is becoming more democratic.
But then that raises questions about quality control, right?
Yeah. It does. And with diversity, there are discussions about representation, power dynamics, and the need for more inclusive narratives.
It's about whose voices get heard, whose stories get told.
Exactly. So shifting gears now, we come to Fabian Hemmert's TEDx talk. He's all about how technology impacts our creativity.
And his background is in design research.
So he's literally trying to invent the future.
Which is pretty cool.
It is. And he starts by talking about our relationship with our phones, which is often complicated.
Because they're amazing tools, but they can also turn us into zombies.
Totally. And he talks about how we need to learn to disconnect, to let go sometimes.
Which is so hard in this day and age.
It is. And he then looks ahead, envisioning a future where computers are everywhere, but they're invisible.
Like integrated into our clothes, our furniture. He even says the word smart will become meaningless.
Because everything will be smart. It's an interesting thought.
A little scary, too.
Definitely. And he emphasizes that as technology becomes more ubiquitous, good design is crucial.
We need to make sure these interactions are human-friendly, not overwhelming.
And he gives these cool examples of student projects like that dimmable AI, where you can actually control how smart it is.
You can even turn it off completely.
Right. Human control is key.
Definitely. And then there's the responsible supermarket checkout concept, where you see the environmental and social impact of your purchases.
Making us more aware of our choices.
Exactly. Then you have the Snap Chains game, which is actually low-tech, but it uses Twitter and photo taking to enhance social interaction.
So technology can be used for good, for connection.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But Hemmert also makes a point about how it might be harder to have original ideas now.
With all the distractions, the multitasking.
He has this experiment where people try to do a simple counting task, and then they try it while multitasking.
And it's way harder when you're multitasking.
Right. So his point is that we need to protect our creativity from the negative side effects of technology.
And he does this great visualization exercise where he has us imagine a key, a door, a room with many doors, and then this gift box.
Right. And inside the box is something that no one's ever seen before.
It's a metaphor for human creativity. And his main takeaway is that we need to disconnect sometimes to allow for invention, for new ideas to emerge.
It's about finding those quiet spaces, those moments of stillness.
Now, Nick Voge's TEDx talk is all about self-worth theory and how it relates to procrastination.
And he starts by sharing how this theory completely changed his understanding of, like, the human condition.
And he's talking about his own experiences with procrastination in school.
Something we can all relate to, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. But he reframes procrastination as not a character flaw or weakness.
He says it's a predictable response based on our motivations and the circumstances we're in.
Right. And he points out how common it is in these high-pressure environments.
Places like Princeton.
Exactly. And he says it's not just about getting good grades. It's also about protecting our sense of self-worth.
Because we're afraid of failing, of not being good enough.
And he describes a typical procrastination scenario. Checking emails, feeling tired, hitting the snooze button, finding excuses not to start.
And then the last-minute panic.
They've all been there.
So self-worth theory, as Woj explains it, says that we have this need to be seen as capable, competent. In school, it's about being smart.
And we'll do whatever it takes to protect that feeling, even if it means sacrificing other things.
And he shows this model where performance equals ability, which equals self-worth.
It's a simple equation, but it can be so damaging.
Especially if you're afraid of failure.
Right, because then any setback feels like a personal attack.
And Woj points out that we procrastinate on things we love too. It's not just about disliking the task.
And this is where things get interesting. He says motivation isn't just about success versus failure.
It's also about approach versus avoidance.
Like how much we want to achieve something versus how much we want to avoid failing.
And high achievers often score high on both.
Which is why they can get stuck in procrastination.
Because they're both driven to succeed and terrified of failing.
So procrastination can actually be a sign of being overmotivated.
Which is counterintuitive.
It is. But it makes sense when you think about it. And Woj says procrastination is more about self-protection than self-sabotage.
It's a way to protect our sense of self-worth, even if it means doing poorly.
Right. It's a built-in excuse. I didn't have enough time. And if you succeed, it's like, see, I'm smart even though I procrastinated.
It reinforces those unhealthy beliefs.
It does. And he points out that some tests actually measure our ability to work under pressure, not just our knowledge.
And trying to scare yourself into starting doesn't work. It just makes the fear worse.
So what are some of the strategies he suggests?
Well, first, it's about awareness, understanding self-worth theory, and recognizing our own patterns.
Being more mindful of our thoughts and feelings.
Exactly. And then it's about tipping the balance towards approach motivation.
Focusing on why we want to do something, not just why we're afraid to do it.
Right. And breaking tasks down into smaller steps, making them feel less daunting.
And finally, he says we need to challenge that equation.
That performance equals ability equals self-worth.
He reminds us that our worth comes from who we are, not what we achieve.
And he ends with that great Mandela quote about letting our hopes, not our fears, guide our choices.
Powerful stuff. So now we dive into the post-digital art world.
With this essay that really focuses on Instagram.
And it introduces these terms, post-digital and post-internet, to describe art made after the initial hype of digital tech died down.
So it's not just about using technology. It's about reflecting on its impact.
Exactly. And the essay says that digital media is no longer just a tool. It's part of how we understand reality.
It's our ontology.
And post-internet and post-digital art come from this sensibility of being super tech-savvy.
So the relationship between the artist, the audience, and the art itself is changing.
And the essay focuses on how artists use Instagram in interesting ways.
Some use it as a gallery space, others try to subvert it, even sabotage it.
And then there's this concept of phygital objects.
Things that exist in both the physical and digital worlds.
A blend of the real and virtual. And it often reflects this tension between nostalgia for craftsmanship and this need to embrace technology.
So the essay delves into defining post-digital, and it traces it back to the early 2000s, this rise of DIY aesthetics, using low-tech approaches, recycled materials. Artists become their own agents, using platforms like Instagram as their main venues.
So it's a shift in attitude. Technology becomes normalized, and it challenges the idea of linear progress.
And there's this element of nostalgia, but it's rooted in current technology. The lines between old and new media blur, and it's more about reconfiguring than just reproducing.
It's a fascinating shift.
It is. And then we have post-internet art.
So how is that different?
Well, post-internet art is about reflecting on the internet's impact, but it often happens offline, like in galleries.
Okay, so it's not just about using the internet as a platform, it's about responding to its influence.
Right. And Cory Arcangel is an example. Marisa Olson defines it as art after excessive internet use.
Makes sense.
And Artie Vierkant's definition focuses on things like ubiquitous authorship, attention as currency, the collapse of physical space, and the infinite reproducibility of digital content.
That's a lot to unpack.
It is. But then Brian Troycor critiques some post-internet art for being too focused on commercial success, mimicking advertising, and not really engaging with the physical space.
So is there a difference in quality or intention between post-digital and post-internet?
Yeah, maybe. Post-internet might sometimes describe art that's seen as less innovative or more commercial, while post-digital might be more about pushing boundaries, being critical.
It's an interesting distinction.
It is. And the essay talks about how artists are activating space by bringing internet communication into the physical gallery.
Like challenging our idea of what art can be.
Exactly. And phygital art, which exists in both realms, further blurs those lines.
And that phygital concept is a whole spectrum, right?
It is. It's not just one thing. It can be physical objects in digital space, digital elements in physical objects, simultaneous existence in both realms. AR, where the digital complements the physical, and even cases where the digital seems to take over the analog.
It's like reality is becoming this layered thing.
Exactly. And post-digital processes often create this surreal feeling because they operate in this blended reality.
So what are some examples of these processes?
Well, one is recycling technological detritus, like Cory Arcangel's Super Mario Clouds, where he isolates the background graphics from the game and slows down the pace.
It makes you see the familiar in a new way.
It does. And then there's post-digital ekphrasis.
Now, classical ekphrasis is about describing a visual artwork in another medium.
Right, like writing a poem about a painting.
But post-digital ekphrasis is about recontextualizing online communication within art,
So Amadina Lobera, for example, she frames these empty landscapes on Instagram.
creating this feeling of emptiness, of simulacra.
Right, and her stories exhibition was like navigating Instagram in real life, using a conveyor belt and encouraging people to film with their phones.
It's like she's commenting on how we consume media.
Exactly. And Cory Arcangel uses bots on Instagram to generate weird, disturbing content. It's all about disrupting our perception.
And what about those artists who are trying to reclaim a sense of artistic aura on Instagram?
That's where augmented virtuality comes in, like Andres Reisinger, who puts physical objects into surreal digital spaces.
So he's creating a new kind of distance, an ethereal quality.
Right, and Lucy Hardcastle works with both physical materials and their digital renderings.
So she creates these fabrics with illusionary textures like a digital trompe-l'oeil.
Exactly. And then there's Amalia Ullman's performance, Excellences and Perfections, where she faked this extreme makeover on Instagram.
To critique the pressure to present a perfect image online.
Right. It's a commentary on how we curate our lives on social media. And Intimidad Romero's self-censure on Facebook also plays with these ideas.
And then there are those implausible exhibits, like Joshua Citarella's compression artifacts, which was a secret show you could only see online.
It makes you question the whole concept of the exhibition space.
It does, and the essay ends by saying that while artists are using these platforms, they're also often trying to subvert them.
They're aware of the commercial objectives, and they're trying to use the platforms for their own purposes.
It's a delicate balance, and the essay points out that even the simple act of liking something is valuable data for shareholders.
It's all about monetizing our attention.
It is. And then it compares post-internet art, which is sometimes seen as a return to the physical object for commercial reasons, with NFTs, which could potentially give value back to digital objects.
It's an interesting parallel, and it also notes that this type of art is different from some early e-literature, which is more about experimenting with form and language.
But there's also post-digital e-literature, which is using those platform mechanics in new ways.
It's a constantly evolving landscape.
It is. And throughout all of this, there's a sense of nostalgia, a questioning of technology, a desire for sustainability.
It's like we're trying to figure out how to live with all this technology without losing ourselves.
Exactly. So now let's shift to Patricia Meyer-Spax's article about the challenges facing the humanities. And she starts by pointing out that humanists have been declaring a crisis for, like, forever.
Declining enrollment, lack of jobs, funding cuts, disrespect is an ongoing theme.
But she outlines three main challenges in universities. The first one is money, which is ironic because
They don't need expensive labs or equipment like the sciences.
Exactly. But they need time, resources for small group teaching, support for graduate students.
And the way universities are run now, like businesses, it makes things worse.
Because everything is about metrics, about return on investment.
And the humanities don't always fit neatly into those categories.
They don't. The second challenge is conflict. All these intellectual divisions within humanities disciplines.
Like people fighting over theory or interpretation. It can get pretty nasty.
It can. And it makes humanists look bad, even though Spax argues that it actually reflects intellectual energy and new possibilities.
It's passion, right?
It is.
Yeah,
But passion that doesn't always translate well to the outside world.
exactly. And that leads to the third challenge, communication. Humanists are not good at explaining the value of what they do.
To the public, to administrators, to funders.
And there's this residue of mistrust from the culture wars, this perception that the humanities are all about political indoctrination.
Or that they're frivolous, irrelevant.
Right. And humanists haven't done a good job of countering those narratives.
So what are some of the solutions proposed?
Well, the ACLS and the National Humanities Center are offering more fellowship support, but that's more individual focused.
Right. It doesn't address the systemic issues.
And Gerald Graff suggests teaching the conflict, like making those disagreements part of the curriculum.
Interesting idea.
It is. But Spass argues that communication underlies all of these challenges.
Because if you can't communicate the value of the humanities, you can't get funding or support.
And the communication breakdowns just make the divisions worse.
So there are these efforts to improve communication, op-eds, radio programs, but Spax calls these Band-Aids.
They're not addressing the root cause.
And part of the problem is that there's a lack of data about the state of the humanities.
Like what fields are even included? How much funding are they getting? What impact are they having?
Right. We need more information to make the case for support, to understand the disagreements, to communicate effectively.
Exactly. So the American Academy of Arts and Sciences is working on these initiatives.
They're investigating the need for a humanities database, writing histories of humanities disciplines, and studying the relationship between the sciences and the humanities.
It's a step in the right direction.
It is. They're trying to provide the information and ideas that the humanities need to thrive.
And they're doing it in this collaborative, interdisciplinary way, which is encouraging.
It is. Now, shifting gears again, we have this article about the future of art in 2024.
And it starts by saying that the art world is on the verge of a transformation.
Due to technology, social and political changes, economic shifts.
Big changes on the horizon.
And the article outlines some key trends, challenges, and opportunities.
Like political urgency and cultural resilience. Art, reflecting global crises, resistance, activism.
It's about art as a force for change.
Definitely. And then there's sustainability, rethinking those big exhibitions, focusing on local approaches, being more eco-conscious.
Which requires institutional change.
Big time. And then there's the rise of digital and AI-driven art, which is raising all sorts of questions.
Like, what does it mean for creativity, for originality?
And there are concerns about data manipulation, ethics.
That's a whole new set of challenges.
It is. And then there's the economic uncertainty, inflation, interest rates. It's all causing a recalibration.
But dealers are optimistic about online sales, and China is becoming a huge market.
Surpassing the UK as the second largest.
Wow, so the market is volatile, but it could be rewarding.
Definitely. And then there's the focus on inclusivity and representation. More support for underrepresented voices.
Indigenous artists, LGBTQ plus artists, we're seeing more recognition for them at events like the Venice Biennale.
Which is great. But then there are the challenges for emerging artists and smaller galleries.
It's hard to get noticed, especially with the economic situation.
And the market is polarized, the big names are doing well, but younger artists are struggling.
So it's a mix of optimism and anxiety. But the article concludes that the art world needs to adapt while preserving its role as a mirror to society.
Art is critique. Art is reflection.
Exactly. And now we come to an article about the impact of AI on the art market.